The zipper made that soft final sigh I always associated with airports and goodbyes. Danny's weekend bag sat on the bench at the foot of our bed like it had already left without him, squared off and ready, his toiletry kit tucked neatly in the side pocket. The morning light in our bedroom was thin and wintry, the kind that turned dust into glitter and made everything feel a little more exposed than it should. He moved around the room in that efficient way he got when he was trying not to forget anything, rolling his shoulders, patting his pockets, checking his phone. 23 years of marriage had taught me his rhythms, the way he always set out his belt and watch like a ritual, the way he ran the tap a few extra seconds to make sure the water was hot, the way he'd pretend he wasn't anxious about travel but would suddenly remember to text his assistant 3 separate times. Passport, charger, presentation clicker, he murmured, more to himself than me. And your toothbrush, I said, because I knew this dance too. He always forgot the toothbrush. He looked at me with that half smile that had carried us through mortgages and teenagers and a sick dog and the long, strange years when the world felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't forget, he lied gently, leaning in to kiss my forehead. You did, I said, and I went into our bathroom to grab it. The toothbrush was still in the cup where it lived. Blue handle, a little worn at the thumb rest. I rinsed it out, shook it dry, and walked back into the bedroom feeling like an ordinary wife doing an ordinary thing, like the world was exactly as I'd always understood it. Danny was by the dresser, checking his Uber app, the faint metallic chime of a notification filling the quiet. He's 5 minutes away, he said. I'll just... Hold on. I knelt by the bag, unzipped the side pocket, and slid the toothbrush into the toiletry kit. My hand brushed something smooth and cool, fabric that didn't feel like his socks or his undershirts. It felt slippery, delicate. I paused with my fingers still inside the bag like I'd reached into water and found a current. I told myself it was a tie, a dress shirt, something satiny for a client dinner. Then I pulled the top layer aside. A flash of pale pink, a glint of black nylon, a folded square of fabric that was unmistakably lace. My breath stopped so hard it felt like someone had pressed a hand over my mouth. There, tucked among his neatly rolled work clothes, were women's things. Not one stray item, not a mistake, not a, how did that get there? A deliberate little collection packed with care, silk panties in soft colours, pantyhose still in their cardboard sleeve, a skirt folded into a perfect rectangle, and a blouse that looked like it would float if you held it up. There was even a small zip pouch, makeup bag size, like a secret inside a secret. My mind did that awful, instant, defensive scramble, grabbing for the first explanation that would keep the ground from falling away. Cheating, a woman, a gift, a weird request, someone else's bag, a prank. But it was his bag, his bench, our bedroom, the life we built like a house with our own hands. I was still kneeling when Danny's voice floated in, casual, unknowing. Soph, you ready? I swallowed. The room felt suddenly too bright, as if the sun had shifted to spotlight this exact moment. My heart was doing something frantic and stupid, like it wanted to outrun the truth before it could catch up. I gently lowered the clothes back into place. My hands shook, so I forced myself to move slowly, like I was smoothing a bedspread. I zipped the bag, and the sound of the zipper closing felt like a lock clicking shut on a door I'd never noticed in our house. I stood. I turned, and my face must have betrayed me because Danny's expression changed, just a flicker of concern, his eyes narrowing like he was reading weather in my skin. What's wrong? He asked. It would have been so easy to explode, to demand an explanation with my voice sharp enough to cut, to tip the bag onto the carpet and point at the evidence like a prosecutor, to make the moment big and dramatic so I didn't have to feel how small and uncertain I suddenly was. But I looked at him. This man I'd loved since my 20s. Now 49 with laugh lines that had deepened into something tender. And I saw his keys in his hand, his phone, the way he was half out the door already. I saw the Uber arriving any second. I saw the airport, the security line, the week-long trip that couldn't be undone. If I confronted him right then, it would become a scene with no privacy and no softness. It would turn into a fight in the driveway, words hurled like stones, and then he'd be gone anyway, carrying whatever shame or panic I'd lit inside him straight onto a plane. I couldn't do that to him, and if I was honest, I couldn't do that to myself either. I needed air. I needed time. I needed to understand what I'd just seen before I shaped it into something irreversible. So I did the only thing I could manage. I walked up to him, cupped his face in my hands, and kissed him like I was trying to keep our life intact with my mouth. Nothing, I lied, and hated myself for it instantly. Just morning brain. Danny held my gaze for a second longer than usual, searching. Then his phone buzzed again. He's outside. Okay, I said, and my voice sounded too bright, like a glass about to crack. He hugged me, strong and familiar, his coat smelling faintly of detergent and aftershave. I held on too long, feeling his heartbeat against my cheek, and wondered stupidly if he could feel mine trying to escape. I'll call you tonight, he said. I'll be here, I said, which was true in the most literal way, even if everything else felt suddenly uncertain. He grabbed the bag. The weight of it made my stomach twist. He slung it over his shoulder, kissed me one more time, and walked out of our bedroom, out of our house, out of the version of my marriage I'd believed I was living. The door clicked. The car started. The sound of tires on the street faded, and I stood alone in the hallway, one hand pressed flat to my chest like I could hold my heart in place by force. For a long time I just listened to the house. The refrigerator hum, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the faint tick of the living room clock. It all sounded normal, cruelly normal. I kept replaying the sight of that lace, that shimmer of nylon, the folded skirt. Each time my brain reached for a conclusion, another part of me yanked it back. I didn't think Danny was cheating. I really didn't. We had the kind of marriage where cheating felt unlikely, not because we were perfect, but because we were steady. We talked, we fought fairly, we still laughed, we still touched each other in small, constant ways, his hand on my lower back when we crossed a street, my fingers on his shoulder when I passed behind his chair. And yet, secrets had a way of making everything feel possible. If he could pack a bag of women's clothing without telling me, what else could he do without telling me? The thought made my skin prickle with a cold sweat. I tried to distract myself with chores because that's what I do when my feelings get too loud. I emptied the dishwasher. I wiped down counters that didn't need wiping. I started a load of laundry even though the hamper wasn't full. I moved through the house like a ghost, tidying the evidence of a life that might be about to change. By noon, my hands were shaking again. By 1, I'd cried twice, quick, ugly bursts that left my eyes hot and my throat raw. By 2, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain like it could give me answers. The rational part of me said, wait, let him come home. Let him tell you in his own time. The other part, the part that had just watched the world tilt, whispered, you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to know whether you're safe. So I did something I never imagined I would do in 23 years of marriage. I opened Danny's laptop. It was on his desk in the study, lid closed like a sleeping animal. I sat down in his chair and felt immediately guilty, like the leather under me could judge. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I was gathering information to keep myself from doing something reckless. I told myself this was protection, not betrayal. The laptop woke with a soft chime. The login screen stared back. I knew his password. He'd never hidden it, never guarded his devices like a fortress. Trust, we always said. We were good at trust. Apparently, we were good at the kind of trust that existed when you didn't know what you didn't know. I typed the password, heart banging. Chrome opened with his last tab still there. Airline itinerary, a PDF of his presentation, a few emails. Nothing scandalous. My stomach loosened by a millimeter. Then I clicked, history. It didn't take long. The truth was laid out in a scroll of links like breadcrumbs leading directly to the thing I'd found in his bag. Women's lingerie sites, articles about how to measure yourself for women's sizes. Men's to women's pantyhose size conversion. Best silk panties for larger hips. How to hide pantyhose under dress pants. Cross-dressing tips for beginners. Shaving legs for pantyhose comfort. There were purchases too, confirmations in his email. Skirts in extended sizes, blouses cut for broader shoulders, underwear in sizes that made my breath catch because they were clearly meant for a body like his. Not some secret girlfriend, not some woman in a hotel room. For Danny, a strange thing happened in my chest, something like relief and grief colliding. Relief because the cheating storyline I'd clung to as the worst case was dissolving. Grief because what remained was its own kind of heartbreak. My husband had been carrying this alone. I leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the air leave my lungs slowly, like I'd been holding it since the zipper. Cross-dressing. The word itself felt heavy, like it had edges. I'd heard it in jokes, in sitcom scenes where men in dresses were punchlines. I'd heard it in the context of drag shows, bright and theatrical. I'd heard it whispered in the margins of conversations about gender and identity, but I'd never heard it in the context of my husband, Danny, who grilled on Sundays and fell asleep during documentaries and cried quietly at sad dog commercials. Danny, who fixed the leaky faucet last month and made me tea when my migraines hit. And yet the evidence was undeniable. He wasn't dabbling in a costume. He was searching for comfort, for fit, for ways to make it work on a male body, for how to do it quietly. Quietly. That was the part that made my throat tighten. Quietly meant alone. Quietly meant shame. I thought about all the nights I'd fallen asleep next to him, our legs tangled, his breathing slow and safe. I thought about all the times he'd been distant for no reason I could name, just a faint sadness around the edges, like he was somewhere far away even when he was right there. I'd always chalked it up to work stress, aging parents, the normal weight of life. Had it been this? Had he been carrying a yearning so carefully he didn't even let it rustle? I didn't know what this meant for our marriage. I didn't know if it meant he wanted to be someone else, or if it was simply a private comfort he'd never dared to share. I didn't know whether it would change how I saw him, how I desired him, how we navigated the world. But I knew one thing with sudden clarity. I loved him. And love to me was a verb. It was choosing, it was showing up. It was being brave when you wanted to hide. So I made a plan. Not a perfect plan. Not a plan a therapist would recommend right out of the gate, but a plan that felt like a bridge instead of a wall. I decided I was going to take the shame out of it by being unmistakably on his side. That afternoon, I drove to a department store on the edge of town where the parking lot was always half empty and no one knew us. My hands were damp on the steering wheel. My brain kept trying to talk me out of it. What if you're wrong? What if he feels exposed? What if this makes it worse? But then I remembered the folded skirt in his bag, packed like a fragile hope, and I kept driving. Inside, the store smelled like perfume and new fabric. The lingerie section was a blur of satin and lace, mannequins with impossible waists. I felt ridiculous, a 47-year-old woman with a cart, reading labels like I was decoding a secret language. I texted myself Danny's shoe size and inseam like a spy. I stared at pantyhose packages with models smiling too brightly and tried to imagine my husband's strong legs under that sheer stretch. I chose carefully. A few pairs of silk panties in colours I thought he'd like. Deep burgundy, soft champagne, classic black. I picked pantyhose in a couple shades and a pair of opaque tights that looked forgiving. I found a skirt with a little weight to it, something that would hang nicely, and a blouse in a creamy colour with sleeves that could accommodate broader arms. I avoided anything too flashy or costume-like. My instinct was to make this feel real, not like a dare. At home, I ordered more online. Options, sizes, a simple camisole, a cardigan. Not because I wanted to overwhelm him, but because I wanted him to feel held. Like there was room to explore without scarcity or panic. Then I waited out the week like someone holding a secret in her mouth, tasting it all day. Danny called every night. We talked about his conference, his colleagues, the bland hotel food. His voice sounded normal. Sometimes I listened too hard, trying to hear the hidden part. Sometimes I wanted to blurt it out, to say, I know, but I kept my promise to myself. Not while he was away, not while he was trapped in a hotel room across the country with nowhere to go if the conversation went badly. On the 6th night, he said, I miss you, in a way that made me picture him alone in a sterile room, and my eyes stung. I swallowed and said, I miss you too, and meant it with my whole body. The day he came home, I cleaned the bedroom like I was preparing a stage. Fresh sheets, soft lamplight, a candle that smelled like cedar and vanilla. I laid out the clothes on the bed in a careful arrangement, panties folded like little flags, pantyhose rolled neatly, the skirt draped so it showed its shape, the blouse hung over a chair like it was waiting. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe like a person who wasn't terrified. When I heard his car in the driveway, my stomach flipped. The front door opened. His suitcase wheels rattled across the entryway tile. I heard him call, Soph? I'm home? In here, I answered, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. He walked into the bedroom and stopped so abruptly it was like he'd run into glass. His eyes went to the bed. His face drained of colour. For a second, he didn't move at all, no blinking, no breathing, just frozen. The silence was thick enough I could feel it in my teeth. "Danny," I said softly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand tightened around the strap of his laptop bag like it was an anchor. I stood and crossed the room slowly, giving him space even as I approached. When I reached him, I wrapped my arms around him from behind the way I sometimes did when he was making coffee, a familiar gesture meant to remind us both of who we were. "I hope you don't get mad," I said into his shoulder, my voice low. "And I didn't mean to invade you. I saw the clothes you packed for the trip when I was putting your toothbrush in the bag. And later I looked at your computer history because I panicked and I needed to understand what I'd seen." His whole body went rigid, then trembled. I felt the tremor travel through his ribs like a suppressed sob. I loosened my arms and stepped around to face him. His eyes were glassy, startled, afraid, and something else, something like a cornered animal that had been discovered. "I want to be involved," I said, and I forced myself to hold his gaze. "I want to be a part of this side of you if you'll let me. I got some things for you, not because I'm trying to control it, but because I want you to know you're not alone in our house. Not anymore." For a heartbeat, he just stared, like he didn't understand the language. Then his face crumpled in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. He dropped everything, his laptop bag, his keys, the little paper bag of airport snacks. It all hit the floor with soft thuds that sounded far away. He grabbed me like he was afraid I'd disappear. He hugged me so tight my breath caught, and then he kissed me, messy and desperate and young, like he had been saving that kiss for years. It wasn't sexual so much as it was survival. His hands held my face with shaking reverence. His mouth was warm, familiar, and suddenly new. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. You're okay?" he whispered, as if saying it too loudly would break it. "I'm okay," I whispered back. "I'm more than okay. I'm sad you carried it alone." A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. Tears slid down his cheeks, and he didn't wipe them away like he usually did. He looked unguarded, stripped of his usual control, and I loved him so fiercely in that moment I thought it might burn. "I thought," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. I don't know. I thought you'd look at me and not see me anymore." "I see you," I said, and I meant it. "I see you, and I love you." He closed his eyes like those words were a weight lifting off his chest. We sat on the bed together, his hand in mine, both of us staring at the clothes as if they were a third person in the room. The lamp made everything soft, warm. Outside, the sky was already turning grey-blue, and the quiet felt like a cocoon instead of a threat. "I don't know what you want," I said carefully. "I don't know what this means for you, but I want to learn, and I want you to feel safe." Danny nodded, blinking hard. "I don't even know how to say it," he admitted. It's not that I want to leave. It's not that I want to be with someone else. I don't know. It's like there's this part of me that lights up when I put on something soft, something feminine. And I've tried to bury it so deep I almost convinced myself it didn't exist. The word feminine landed between us like a delicate object. I turned it over in my mind, feeling its weight. "Do you want to try?" I asked, gesturing gently to the bed. His eyes flicked to mine. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said, "but only if you want to. And we go as slow as you need." He let out a shaky breath. "I want to," he whispered. "God, I want to." I stood first, offering him my hand. He took it like he was stepping onto ice. I told him quietly, "If you want to take a shower first, shave anything you want gone. No pressure. Just, I've read enough to know pantyhose can feel better on smoother skin." His face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and something like gratitude. "You read about it?" I gave him a small smile. "I went down a rabbit hole." He laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension like sunlight through clouds. "Okay," he said. "Okay." While he showered, I sat on the bed and listened to the water running, the muffled sounds of him moving, the normal domestic noises of a life continuing. I didn't feel like I was waiting for a stranger. I felt like I was waiting for Danny to come home in a deeper way. When he emerged, his hair damp, his skin pink from the steam, he looked lighter, not giddy, not unburdened completely, but as if he'd set down a heavy backpack for the first time in years. His legs were freshly shaved and he kept glancing down at them with a shy amazement, rubbing his palm over the smoothness like he couldn't believe his own skin. "Is this okay?" he asked, voice small. "It's more than okay," I said. "Come here." I helped him the way you help someone with something fragile. Slow hands, clear consent, checking his face for every sign of discomfort. I didn't tug or rush. I let him guide what he wanted. When he chose the black pantyhose, his fingers trembled opening the package. He held the nylon like it was a piece of night sky. We sat at the edge of the bed and he carefully slid them up, inch by inch, the material gliding over his ankles, his calves. His breath caught when it reached his knees. The pantyhose made his legs look different. Not smaller, not less masculine, just softened, blurred at the edges. He stared at himself like he was seeing a version he'd only met in secret. When he pulled on the skirt, it settled around his hips with a gentle swish, and that sound, fabric moving the way it wanted to, made him close his eyes for a second. The blouse, cream-coloured, fit better than I expected, the fabric draping over his shoulders without strain. He looked down at himself, then up at me, and his eyes were bright with something I could only call relief. "I feel," he started, then laughed at himself. "I don't even have the words." "You look beautiful," I said, and I watched his throat work around the emotion. He blinked hard. "You're not just saying that? You're not—" "No," I said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because I want you to hear it from me." He stood and turned slowly, the skirt moving with him. There was no performance in it, no exaggerated femininity. It was simply a man wearing clothes that made him feel like himself in a way he'd never allowed. "Makeup?" I asked gently. "Only if you want." He shook his head quickly, then softened. "Next time," he said, and the phrase "next time" hit me like a promise. "Right now I just want to be close to you and tell you. I've never told anyone." So we sat on the bed, his hand in mine, and he spoke in pieces at first, like someone testing a language they'd been forbidden to speak. He told me about being a teenager and sneaking into his sister's room when no one was home. Heart pounding, pulling on a slip and feeling this sudden hush in his mind like static turning off. He told me about the guilt, the fear of being caught, the way he'd thrown the clothes back in place with shaking hands and then spent days pretending nothing had happened. He told me about adulthood, about buying one pair of panties in a faraway town and hiding them in his sock drawer, about putting them on under his work clothes and feeling both comforted and terrified all day, like he was holding a secret ember against his skin. "I don't know why," he said, voice cracking. "I've asked myself 1,000 times. It's not that I want to be someone else. It's like this softness calls to me, like I'm allowed to breathe differently." I squeezed his hand. "Did you ever think about telling me?" He nodded, tears slipping out again. 100 times. And every time I pictured your face changing. I pictured you looking at me like I was a joke, or like I was broken, and I couldn't survive that. My chest ached. I leaned in and kissed his cheek, tasting salt. "You're not broken," I said. "And you're not a joke. You're Danny." He made a sound that was pure, exhausted relief. He leaned into me, and we held each other with the quiet intensity of people who had almost missed each other in their own marriage. Over the next hour, we talked like we hadn't talked in years. Not because we hadn't communicated, but because we'd never stood on this particular edge together. We talked about privacy and boundaries, about what he wanted and what he didn't want, about what scared him. We talked about the difference between clothing and identity and how he still wanted to be my husband, still loved being Danny, still loved our life. We talked about how it might feel to share this carefully, how to make room for it without turning it into a spectacle. I admitted my own fears too, fear of the unknown, fear of what other people would think, fear of messing it up and hurting him. We promised to keep talking, to ask instead of assuming, to be gentle. At one point he looked down at his hands, big hands that had built bookshelves and held our babies, and he laughed softly through his tears. I can't believe you're here, he said. I can't believe you did this. I can, I said, and I brushed my thumb over his knuckles. Because I love you, and because I want us to have things we can be honest about, even the parts that feel scary. He looked at me then with such open devotion it stole my breath. I don't deserve you, he said. Don't, I warned gently. Don't put me on a pedestal. Just let me be your wife. Let me be in it with you. He nodded, and something unclenched in his shoulders like he'd been holding them up around his ears for decades. Later, when the candle burned low and the house outside our bedroom was dark, he changed back into his usual clothes, folding the skirt and blouse with the same care he'd packed them with. But this time he didn't hide them in a suitcase. He placed them in a drawer I cleared for him, right there in our bedroom, not in the garage, not in the attic, not in a box labelled old cords. A drawer that said, this belongs in our life. When we finally lay down, he pulled me close, his forehead pressed to mine again like he was anchoring himself. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not making me leave my own house, he said, voice barely audible. For letting me exist. Tears slid into my hair. You never had to leave, I whispered. You just had to let me in. In the weeks that followed, something shifted between us. Not in a dramatic movie way, but in a steady deepening, like a river carving a new channel. He told me when he wanted to wear something under his work clothes, and I found myself smiling at the tenderness of it. Sometimes I'd text him during the day, "Are you feeling soft today?" And he'd reply with a shy emoji and a simple yes. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, he'd try on a blouse while I sat nearby painting my nails, and the normalcy of it made my heart ache in the best way. I wasn't suddenly an expert, and I didn't pretend I was. There were moments I felt awkward, moments I needed to check in with myself, moments I had to unlearn old assumptions. But every time we met those moments with honesty instead of fear, we grew stronger. Our marriage didn't crack under the truth. It widened to hold it. And sometimes, late at night, when we were brushing our teeth side by side, I'd catch his eye in the mirror and he'd smile. A real, unguarded smile. And I'd think about that morning with the suitcase and the zipper and the secret. I'd think about how close we'd come to letting silence win. I'm glad I didn't make a scene at the door. I'm glad I waited until we could have softness. I'm glad I chose love over panic, curiosity over condemnation. Because the truth is, the most intimate thing Danny ever shared with me wasn't a body part or a fantasy or a secret act. It was his fear, and the fact that he trusted me enough, finally, to put it down. If there's anything I learned, it's this. The scariest conversations are often the ones that set you free. Be open with your partner when you can. Be gentle when you can. And if you find a secret folded carefully in someone you love, remember that secrets are often just tenderness with nowhere to go until you make a place for it.